online. 22.
Do you need to switch to more view?
Let's see, I'm just.
And we have to turn on speakers to the volume.
Forgot you turned them off. Okay.
What's new?
Good to go.
So welcome everyone to the third Canadian Mountain Network webinar. So it's the first webinar of 2018. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today for this webinar. My name is Christy Urban. I'm the Executive Director for the Canadian Mountain Network. We welcome comments and questions, which we'll ask for. You can certainly submit them through the webinar, and we'll be reading them out after each section. And Kathy, in one moment here, will go through how to do that online. And in the room here, we have several people as well. Just raise your hand at the end of each section, and then we can take questions verbally. Please note that we'll be following up with all registrants through email and distributing an online form where you can add additional comments and feedback afterwards. So what is the purpose of this webinar? So today is the next step in the iterative process that we've been on since early 2016 as we work toward developing the Canadian Mountain Network and pursuing our ambition of a successful Networks of Centers of Excellence application, which, as most of you know, is a signature funding program of the federal government for national research networks. We're here to announce that our letter of intent has been shortlisted and that we've been invited to submit a full application for the NCE competition. This webinar is a forum for a two-way conversation, the first of many opportunities in the coming weeks. We have to work together in order to make our proposal outstanding, and again, that's the reason for the webinar today. So at this moment, I'm going to pass it off to Kathy Watton. She's our Canadian Mountain Network Administrative Assistant, who will be running the webinar, so she can give an overview of our webinar software, Zoom, so people clearly know how to make comments and questions online.
Good morning, everyone. If you've never participated in one of these before, they have a few fun functions. So we have a Q&A section, we have a chat section, we have the ability to raise your hand, and do note that we are recording this webinar and it will be posted on our website by tomorrow at the very latest. All right, so once you are in the webinar, you'll be able to resize your screen. I think it defaults automatically to being a full screen view, but you can just press escape or hit the options in the top right-hand corner so that you're able to change those options. You can also resize presenter and the slides so that you can adjust that to how you prefer. Okay. Can you advance to the next screen? Because I don't get. Just, yeah, hit the next arrow. There we go, there we go. So in order to be able to chat with us, you just want to hit in the top area. There's going to be a little button that says chat. So you can just send that chat to all panelists or to all panelists and all attendees, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. There we go. And so this is what it's going to look like with the chat panel open there. So you'll be able to see if you've sent the response privately, then you'll be able to see just your response. If other panelists have asked public questions, you're actually going to be able to see their questions as well as our responses, providing we make them public. There are very few reasons why we wouldn't, but just so you know, that's what you'll see. And then you can also ask questions to us. So you just click the Q&A button and you can send your questions anonymously, or you can actually send them to the entire group. Just so you are aware, any questions that are asked, whether in chat or in the Q&A, we will be addressing at at in between sections. So as we move from one set of information to another, we will be taking questions at that point. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I just wanted to introduce our speakers today. So our first speaker will be Dr. David Hick, Professor of Ecology at the University of Alberta and the Canadian Mountain Network Co-Research Director. Next on the screen you'll see Norma Cassie, and she'll be speaking as well. So she's the Director of Indigenous Collaboration at the Arctic Institute of Community-Based Research and also the Canadian Mountain Network Co-Research Director. The next picture there is myself. Once again, I'm the Executive Director of CMN. And the following picture is Matthew Barry there, the Director of Partnership Development for the Canadian Mountain Network. And so Norma is calling in and videoing in from the Yukon, and Matthew from Calgary, Alberta. All right. Next slide, please. So about the Canadian Mountain Network, just for some of you who may not be completely familiar, I'll just give you a very quick background. So we were formed in January 2016 at the first Canadian Mountain Network workshop. There was unanimous sentiment to forming a mountain network, that it was needed in Canada. We worked in 2016 and 2017, and now into 2018, with regional initiating groups to better understand what is important to mountain peoples and mountain environments. We developed a mountain portal to share mountain news, featuring an online directory of network members, and to translate mountain research findings into plain language. So you can see us online at canadianmountainnetwork.ca. Once again, in 2016 and 17, we celebrated the United Nations International Mountain Day. December 11th is the date. And we did this with communities across Canada, and we'll do the same thing again this year in 2018. So it's become a really fun event. Some mountain communities have actually put on 3-day events, which is now they have their own websites and stuff. So it's really cool to see the community coalescing and being able to share stories and ideas and the different cultures from different places. So that's wonderful. You can visit that website. We have an event website at internationalmountainday.ca. And we're now working, as you all know, on a full proposal in application for a network of centers of excellence. Okay, next slide, please. So about the NCE program. So it's a federal program that was established in 1989 for long-term funding, focusing on specific issues and strategic areas, mobilizing multidisciplinary research capacity, accelerating new knowledge creation, training of highly qualified people. It's national and international collaboration. So an average between 15 and 25 projects in 3 to 6 theme areas, 50 to 75 professors in 10 to 20 universities across the country, 100 to 200 highly qualified personnel, and 50 partner organizations. So those are just kind of some average numbers to give you guys an idea. And with that, I'm going to pass it to David to talk a little bit about the competition. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're not in a morning time zone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to just, Norma Cassie and I will sort of lead the next part of this discussion through where we are, how we arrived where we are today, and where we're going, and some of the timelines and opportunities that we want to encourage you to participate in these next steps of developing the Canadian Mountain Network proposal for this NCE competition. As Christy just indicated, we've been working on this for a couple of years, at least, maybe more. And it was only in August that there was a formal announcement for this competition. We submitted a letter of intent in November, and just under 2 weeks ago, we learned that we were successful in that process. The full applications are due on the 19th of July, and the competition results will be announced in October. Now, I just want to take you through a little bit of where we sit in that competition. There were 69 letters of intent that were submitted from organizations and institutions and networks across Canada, and 11 of those were invited forward to the full application stage. And here's a list of those. This competition allowed for both legacy networks. So these are networks that have been funded through a full cycle of previous NCE eligibility. There's 3 of those: ArcticNet, Stroke Network, and the Stem Cell Network. And there are 8 new network applications that have also been invited forward. Now you'll notice most of these are biomedical in their focus, but there are several that have a stronger social science focus or an environmental focus. And we're certainly in that group, I think, along with ArcticNet and Bioinnovative Renewables Network. So these are the networks, the teams across Canada that will be working to develop full applications at the same time we are. And one of our goals, of course, is to find areas of complementarity where they exist. Next slide, please. So I just want to very quickly say a few things about the letter of intent. Many of you were involved in the development of the letter of intent, Kathy. But just as a quick review, we had essentially 12 pages to describe our network vision, the management structure, an overview of our proposed research program, to identify potential network partners, to describe how training would be integrated into the program, the end uses of the new knowledge that would be generated as part of the Canadian Mountain Network activities. We had we could attach 5 letters of support and a brief budget page. All of this, including the letters of support that we received up until recently, are accessible on the website here, and I certainly encourage you to review that if you haven't had a chance to see it. Thanks. Next. And just very briefly, I just want to reiterate the vision that we articulated to provide Canadians with state-of-the-art tools and knowledge based on multiple ways of knowing that are essential for informed decision-making to sustain and manage mountain places in the face of unprecedented environmental, economic, and societal change. And while we have partners and want to be inclusive of mountain regions and mountain peoples and mountain communities from coast to coast to coast, there is certainly a strong emphasis on the mountains in Western Canada, but we have partners from across the country, and certainly looking in this next stage of application development to welcome new partners and have discussions about how those new partners could be involved in the development of the network. Kathy? As part of the LOI process, these were reviewed by a standing selection committee at the NCE Secretariat in Ottawa, and we received their assessment, and I'm sharing that with you in its entirety. There was a list of strengths and a list of weaknesses. So I just want to quickly look at these strengths that were identified in their review of the LOI, acknowledging the team that has come together around this proposal, and recognizing, I think, in some ways, perhaps even a surprise to some of those members of the panel, that this is an area that's critical to much of Canada and has implications both nationally and globally. We've worked very hard to try to include partners, particularly Indigenous leaders in the co-design and the decisions about how to implement the network. We will continue to work on this, but we've tried to embed that across the entire proposal. They recognized that we had also, even at this stage of the LOI, advanced a fairly convincing argument for the long-term sustainability of the network and the investment from network partners. This is a key feature of the NCE program, that these things have not just the input of the federal funding, but it be matched with partner funding as well. We will talk more about that in a minute. We also have tried to articulate a plan for how trainees or what in granting council speak is called highly qualified personnel will be developed and included in the research program and in the network at all levels, and as well the involvement of local communities and their involvement in designing and producing the knowledge, and most importantly, utilizing the knowledge that is created through network activities. So those were the strengths, and we were very pleased to see they picked up on things that we felt were very critical to the future of the network. They also identified a few weaknesses, and I don't think these were a surprise. We still have work to do to strengthen the coherence and integration of the research themes. And we need to be very clear in the full application how those activities will have the greatest overall impact. And so we have to pay attention to that going forward. But in the space that was available, we certainly, I think, were able to provide a convincing perspective on the opportunity that the network was creating. We also were encouraged to develop stronger connections with similar networks in other countries and to identify ways that they could contribute to building the network, and reciprocally how we could contribute to activities in mountain regions in other parts of the world. And so we've started to develop that. Space limitations in the LOI certainly didn't do justice to some of those conversations that are taking place. So those are the strengths and weaknesses, and we need to be cognizant of those as we develop a full application. And we need to actually address them explicitly, but I think we wanted to share that because this is really important in shaping how we go forward. Next slide, please. So what Norma and I want to do is talk a little bit about the full application. And next slide. And there's several things that will happen fairly quickly. One is that we have an opportunity to suggest names for the expert review panel that will be reviewing the entire application. And these will be appointed by the NCE Secretariat in Ottawa. By the 20th of March, we need to provide those names, and we're certainly very open to any suggestions you might have. You can do that today using the chat function, or you can send us that information later on. Just a reminder as well that on the very first page of the application, we need to indicate what proportion of the network's research is related to natural sciences and engineering research, social sciences and humanities research, or health research. And we very much anchored the network, I think, most strongly in the NSERC and SSHRC granting councils, but we need to be absolutely clear and try to understand where that balance is, because we can't just be weighted into one area. The actual application itself is shorter than in the previous competitions. It's only about 40 pages. It's fairly free-form. The same sections as the letter of intent, plus performance management framework, the response to those comments from the Standing Selection Committee that I just showed you, as well as a discussion of overlap with other relevant initiatives. We have to have a more detailed budget, obviously. We're asking for $20 million from the NCE program, and we've said we would match that one-to-one by the end of 5 years, and that can be a combination of cash and in kind. And although that's not a firm requirement, it's pretty essential that we find a way to ensure that we have those sorts of contributions to support the activities of the network. And then we can have a maximum of 15 letters of support from non-academic partners and stakeholders that would be attached as well. Next slide. So I'm going to turn to Norma now, and we just want to talk about some of the key elements of the research program, and then we'll finish with a description of our preparatory call for proposals that will help us to develop the full application. So Norma, I'm going to turn this over to you now, and then but I'll be here if we want to go back and forth on things. So we'll just get set up in Whitehorse now with Norma.
Sure. Thank you everyone for being here and coming. I think this is quite an exciting opportunity for really good collaboration across Canada in the mountainous areas and with the communities that are cohabitating and living together in these mountainous areas, and also with Indigenous peoples. And I think that it's like I'm feeling quite excited about it, and I think that the stronger that we get together and move forward and really put all the pieces together of this proposal would be really awesome. And I'm really happy that whoever is on the webinar everywhere, hello, welcome, thank you for being there. And we have quite a few people here in the Yukon sitting around our table as well. and welcome to you guys as well. It's a good showing of how we're going to work together to move forward. And we're going to the next slide on the modes, the 3 modes of the proposal. We have no slide up on the screen. Hello.
Sorry, give me a sec. It should flip back. Okay, give me 1 second. I can fix this.
Okay.
It's one of those,
So we
sometimes it does unexpected stuff.
Do you have it in front of you, Norma? Do you have a hard copy of it?
Yes, so I can just go ahead.
You might go ahead, and while Kathy's just trying to figure out how to bring this, we can see it on the screen here, but I think it's sharing it she just needs to sort out. So maybe you want to just begin to talk about the 3 modes, and we'll bring it up as quickly as we can.
Okay, so there are 3 modes that have been decided by the research teams, and the first one is mode 1. The CMN aims to support the sustainability of mountain spaces and the communities who inhabit them to advance research. I'm just going to read from what I have here. And also mode 1 is inclusive of, or all the modes are inclusive of co-design this recognizes the interconnectedness of the mountains, the mountain environment, social economic systems. So everything in relation to all the communities that inhabit the mountains, and tourism, economic opportunities, and those kinds of things will be involved. And this meets the needs of all the diverse mountain communities, also Indigenous peoples. And researchers also maybe from traditional academic and non-academic settings, for example, non-government organizations, governments, and Indigenous organizations may lead and co-lead projects. So for mode 1, projects will be initiated and led by researchers. They involve carrying out research on pressing topics that have been identified and endorsed by network partners, including researchers themselves. Also, when would CMN advance mode 1 project, that would be a research from network and partner organization is a leading project that addresses a pressing need for information that has been identified by network partners and include researchers. And mode 2, this mode may be suitable when network partners are interested in collaborating at all stages of the research project. Also, the projects are co-developed, co-designed, and produced by multiple network partners, including researchers and knowledge users, such as communities, industry, governments, Indigenous organizations, and non-government organizations as well. So the projects also will be co-designed and co-produced with all engaged partners. And for the mode 2, 3, or for 3, I'm sorry, I must have missed mode 2 here. Just 1 second. Okay, going on to mode 3. I did do that one. So this mode describes research projects in which researchers shift roles from driving projects to supporting community partners. This is where there will be much more community-based participatory research put communities into the lead roles by supported researchers. So basically, we're seeing collaboration with Indigenous peoples, and others at the community level doing community-based research. The two-way capacity building between researchers and community members is built into the project. When projects incorporate key elements of Indigenous research, methodologies as rationality and reciprocity. So when projects seek to contribute to creating sustainable social and economic opportunities, advancing Indigenous self-determination, and strengthening resiliency in mountain communities and their supporting ecosystems. So there's a lot of opportunity, and particularly for Mode 3, and also included in that is where projects incorporate Indigenous ways of knowing and doing. So we find this very exciting to be able to work on all three modes and have partners and cooperation with each other to be able to develop research projects under these three modes. David, you got anything to add?
No, thanks, Norma. That's a great overview, and particularly with the room full in Yukon, I want to just acknowledge how much we appreciate all the work that Yukon put into helping us to articulate those approaches of the three modes that have been incorporated into our research proposal. So we'll come back to that because it's fundamental to the understanding the types of projects that we would like to see advanced as part of the development of our full application, and that the CMN is committed to supporting going forward. But let me just say a few things, and Norma, you can jump in here as well, maybe in a second. But in terms of the structure of the research program, themes. These are places for life or ways of being, and elevating opportunities and ways of doing. And within each of those two themes, we identified 2 challenge areas. And then out of that fell 5 research program areas. And these are this is the initial structure of our application. We're not tied to this. In fact, we fully anticipate that it will evolve as the full application develops. But let me just say something about the challenge areas. And the first of these, and these are really looking forward to what the outcome is of the research areas that we're considering. So for example, under theme 1 and the first challenge, we really see the opportunity to transform our understanding of mountains in sustaining Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and the diversity of connections that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous residents have with mountain environments. Under the challenge area 2, this focus on revolutionizing our understanding of the services that mountains provide, the suite of ecosystem services. There's a number of things that are possible here. Partners have been discussing how we could establish a world-class mountain biodiversity and biosurveillance system that characterizes some of the unique features of mountain food web interactions. And this is knowledge that's essential for developing better strategies for local food security and conservation strategies, things like that. So there's a number of different areas, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but let me just say a few things about theme 2 as well. In the third challenge area around accelerating the development of innovative solutions for sustainable community development, there's opportunities here to look at some of the diversity of opportunities that exist in mountain communities, the economic and cultural and social impacts of tourism and infrastructure needs and other land uses. And then finally, under challenge 4, we really want to focus on some of the mechanisms that would be that need to be developed for Indigenous communities in particular to lead in land use planning and conservation, and the impact of conservation policies on the design of future protected areas, including Indigenous protected areas. And this is a very important area for all of Canada, but I think particularly in mountain regions across the country. So these are the types of outcomes we're seeking. There is more detail, of course, in the letter of intent, but as we go through this request for proposals and applications, this is sort of our starting point. This is the reference material that evolved over the course of discussions in preparation of that LOI. Norma, do you want to add anything? And then I think we should pause for questions and comments from anyone online or in the room here or in Whitehorse. So Norma first, please.
I think that these themes that we challenges 1, 2, 3, and 4 all encompasses everything that's happening across Canada right now, especially the move towards creating more Indigenous protected areas across Canada. And as we traveled throughout the Yukon Territory and collected ideas for research from the First Nations communities, a lot of it was around land use planning in preparation towards protected areas, and also in the areas of climate change and having to plan forward because of the climate changes that are happening so quickly in the communities, and it's hard to keep up. They're talking about adaptive strategies to work with scientists and researchers and partner up with other people to come out with adaptive and mitigation strategies around climate change. And also, again, what's really exciting is that in order to create Indigenous protected areas, a lot of our lands need to be planned, in particularly in the area of collecting Indigenous knowledge going into a land use plan. So there's a lot of excitement as we travel around the Yukon and talk to Indigenous peoples about this portion of the network.
Thank you, Norma. I'll pause for questions if you have things online, or I'm not sure how it's being moderated in Whitehorse, but please jump in, and if there's anyone here in the room, please.
Any questions from here?
So first of all, I want to say that LOI was an amazing piece of work, and congratulations to the CMN. My question is, these 4 challenges, I suspect one could spend $20 million over 5 years on each of those. I'm curious as to how the CMN board may be considering allocations to each of those challenges.
So the question was how this is very ambitious across the program, and how will we allocate priority and resources to these different areas. And so this is what we want to develop through this preparatory call for proposals that we'll talk about in a minute. You know, if we're successful, there's potentially through the NCE program 15 years of funding, and we're not going to be able to support everything and do everything in the first year or even in the first 5 years. So what we're trying to understand is where should we start? What are the starting points? And I should add another important criteria in this competition for NCEs is that we can demonstrate we can hit the ground running. So there are some things that might take a little bit longer to develop, or where we'll need to sort of understand how best to move forward. And those are things where in the second or third or fourth tranche of funding, there will be an opportunity for people to participate. So we'll describe that in a minute, but it will be a challenge, and you're absolutely correct. You know, there's the resources that will be available are not meant to be the sole support for those activities. This is where the building blocks of it's a networks of centers of excellence. So if those other centers of excellence exist, there may be gaps, we can build new ones, but we certainly have a solid foundation, and we can leverage resources that are already being allocated. Perhaps the most honest answer is that we haven't really discussed that in detail yet. This is going to come out of the process. So there isn't sort of an agenda. We want this to be emergent and be part of the community discussion going forward.
Can I ask it?
Yes, Heather Youngwas.
So I actually had flagged that same kind of question, and obviously it's going to be something that we're going to have to work out over the long term or the medium term. when we're talking about the modes, the 3 different modes, so we've got the researcher-led, we've got the partnership-led, we've got the community-led, I think it's going to be important for us to identify how mode 3 feeds into the other ones and is fed by the other ones. And I remember from reading the LOI and from our discussions that that's what we want, but it's the how we're going to do it. I think that's going to be essential.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So the question was really how to make sure that the 3 modes, and in particular mode 3, is not treated separately or isolated, that it feeds into the other modes, and the other approaches, other ways of knowing contribute to the development of mode 3. And maybe we end up somewhere where mode 3 becomes the way that we function. I don't know, but at the moment, there are these different ways of, and there's historical reasons because funding has flowed. There hasn't been equity in how funding is available, and so we want to initially not just encourage, but nurture and create that opportunity. We'll learn as we go. And Norma or anyone else in Whitehorse, would you like to weigh in on that question as well?
Anyone here?
Can hear you.
I think at our institute here, the Arctic Institute of Community-Based Research, basically what we do is that we have to be invited into a community to do a project. And then it depends on what the project is. We will bring in a university student and work along with the university that student is coming from, or if it's the community's desire. Then we also make sure that we train youth at all times. We always train 2 female and 2 male and make sure that we're working all together as a team. They're well trained and they're the ones that become the researchers. And it's been proven to really be successful. And there's a lot of open avenues for people to work together, to work with the academic community. Like for example, if there's going to be land use planning and resource development planning, for example, we will in many cases work with professionals and academics within that project itself. So there's a lot of room for collaboration through all 3 modes. And also if there's communities that really want to lead their own research project, then that is also available here as well under this mode, or under mode 3, for example.
Thanks. Christy.
There's also a comment online. Mode 3 may help to organize community-led research projects locally and regionally. So that's that feedback. I have one more question from online folks. Sorry?
We have a question here at the table as well.
Okay.
You go ahead.
Yeah. It's Brian Horton with the Northern Climate Exchange at the Yukon College. I had a question about the 20 people that you're looking for panelists. Do you have any guidance or suggestions on the sorts of people that they should be? Should they be international? Should they be Canadian?
I was going to review that at the end again because there's sort of some brainstorming around people. Yes, so these are experts. So we don't know they'll be selected. This is just our opportunity to influence the smaller group that will be selected for the panel. And to a certain extent, it will depend on people's availability between the 20th of July and the end of August. That's when that whole review process will take place in a very accelerated way. What we're looking for, they could be international, they could be Canadian, they should not be members of the network or very closely aligned members. There is conflict of interest guidelines that have been shared as part of this request. And so they need to be arm's length from at least the principal investigators or key network investigators. We have 2 people in the room that have some experience with this, and maybe either of you would like to just add a comment on what type of guidance to provide when we're seeking to shortlist some people.
Well, certainly, can I answer? Yeah.
Please.
Certainly, Tri-Council prides itself on a review process that is the best in the world. And so what they want are world authorities on things. That's what they want to see, that you're nominating those kinds of people. And that demonstrates confidence on the part of the project PIs in the quality of what it is that you're promoting. I mean, we can all think of names off the top of our heads, David Schindler being one, but the problem with conflict of interest is going to be something we're going to have to strategize around, for sure.
Right. So, Brian, I think the short answer is I think the conflict of interest part is hard. We can't be all-knowing, and so what we'd like to do is solicit names. All we need is a very short bio and a piece of contact information for those individuals. Clearly, we want to have people that can understand and contribute to the work that we're doing in Mode 3 and in Mode 2 and in Mode 1. But we given the approach we're taking and the diversity of disciplinary interests, this is a chance for us to find suggest some names of people who we think would be would understand the approach we're taking, and as Heather said, be recognized as experts nationally and in the world as able to evaluate the proposal and provide those recommendations back to the NCE management committee. Maybe that's not specific enough, but I think if you can imagine people that would be could be suitable in that role, then that's what we're asking for is to make them known to us, that we can try to put a list together for the next 2 weeks.
And the quick follow-up actually is panelists can be from outside of traditional academic settings, correct?
Yes, please. I mean, I think that's very important that we do advance some names that may not be on in the Tri-Council Rolodex. I think this is an opportunity for us to do that. Yeah.
I'm not sure, like, it'd be good to know how many people are on the webinar. And however, I just wanted to add here that in the panelists as well, we need to also consider that that we have people who have a good understanding of Canada's Indigenous peoples, the protocols under the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, and also have a really good understanding of how community-based research may work. So we also need to have such as that on this panel as well.
Yeah, thanks, Norma. That's right. Christy, you have a hand.
There's a couple questions. I'll just read them together since they're the same topic. So, what evidence is necessary to count an international partner to be involved? And also are international partners on an individual basis, or is it about linking them to at an institutional level?
Right. So international partners cannot be funded directly by the NCE, but we can have resources made available for them to participate in activities, workshops, and perhaps even field studies. But that we can't flow money to international partners directly, at least not the way things have happened in the past. But they certainly can be collaborators. They could be individuals. They could be institutes. They could be networks. So I think it's really a question of the alignment with the research activity that they would be contributing to. It'd be nice if there was a two-way flow of knowledge and training opportunities and things like that between the partners in Canada and partners externally. Internationally, there's a tremendous amount of work on sustainable mountain development and the ways that people are in mountain communities have been marginalized in different national and regional settings, and I think there's things that we can certainly learn that would shape the research program that the CMN would advance. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of things we'll be able to provide from our context that would be supportive of things going on in other parts of the world. This will develop over time, but I would say that it's really up to when you're seeking an international partnership to make sure there's that alignment with the actual program itself or some of the outputs of the network as a whole. Okay, so maybe in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next part of this presentation. And again, Norman, I would like to talk about the preparatory call for proposals. Next slide. So this is part of the process that is considered pretty much essential best practice for the development of an NCE application. We need this for a variety of reasons. We clearly need it on an ongoing basis to distribute the funding that will be allocated through the NCE. And we will hold several calls over the next 5 years. This preparatory call, though, the purpose of the preparatory call is primarily to gather information about the research interests and priorities of groups, teams, and even individuals in some cases that would like to contribute to the development of the full application. And it also provides us an opportunity to identify 10 or 12 projects that would be highlighted in the full application. And I think most importantly, to begin to develop our review process, our adjudication process that will be inclusive of proposals that come from modes 1, 2, and especially 3. We're not a network, we're not extant, so we have to sort of figure out how to do this in a way that is appropriate for the model we're developing, and we have to expedite this because we need to have this information available very quickly for the full proposal. But this call is really about creating an opportunity for the larger community to provide us with that input that we will use to strengthen the full application, the research areas, and the outcomes of that work. And then it will also provide us an opportunity to identify a few projects that could be fast-tracked for funding. We can't make any funding decisions. We have no money. We're not a network yet. We haven't been incorporated as a network. We don't have a formal research management committee or a board of directors. So none of this is intended to pretend that there will be funding at the end of the day. But it contributes to the development of the application, and if we're successful, then that will allow us to move forward. But anything that we do at this stage is very much voluntary on the part of people that would help us, and would, even for those projects that we think are extraordinarily strong and we'd like to support, they would still need to go through the formal review process of the NCE once it's approved and established. So I just want to be clear about this. This is a mechanism by which we're requesting community input into the development of the full application, and it allows us at the same time to identify things that we would like to advance in the first at the earliest opportunity, and to learn about the review process. It won't be perfect the first time through. We're under some constraints, but that's our intent. I should also add that we don't intend to allocate all of the research funding in this call. This would be, we will leave lots of room for a second call that would be announced once the network is successful, say, next year. So this is sort of just the first wave. Gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that we can function as a network. And we need that information for the full application. We can come back to questions on that in a minute, but maybe let us just tell you about the rest of this. No, next one. No, go back. One more. There we go. Huh. So what we're looking for are teams, not just individuals, things that are interdisciplinary and inclusive of diversity. They address the themes and challenges that were articulated and laid out in the LOI, or they could be new things, but that's sort of the focus. And the budgets are that we've capped are $150,000 a year for either 2 or 3 years from the CMN funds, and of course there could be partner funding. And Norma, do you want to say anything about how we really want to encourage the community involvement and Indigenous research partners and knowledge users in this process?
Sure. There's definitely a lot of forward discussion about working towards, in particularly conservation and Indigenous protected areas, due to the fact that a lot of species, traditional species, animal species, are declining so fast, and that's a very much part of our food systems. And a lot of these species are all part of mountainous areas, and the communities are really wanting to move forward and be able to research what's going on within their homelands, and work towards trying to do a lot of for conservation of these areas, water, mountainous water species that live around there, and really come up with some adaptive strategies to work along with other researchers together to be able to come up with some solutions to move forward. There's two very huge interest here in the Yukon Territory with respect to preparatory call for proposals. One of them is the Mackenzie Mountains between the Kaska Nation and the Sahtu. They have been working for many years to collaborate in creating a protected area so that the two territories can come together. And also from the southern part of the Yukon Territory, the Montana Mountain area is also some preparatory call, or will be working towards possible preparatory call here for a proposal. So there's a lot of interest in those areas, for sure.
Thanks, Norma. And perhaps in the discussion period, if people have specific questions about the types of things they're imagining, we can do that. But next slide, Kathy, please. In terms of the structure of the application, it's relatively short. It'll be about 10 pages. This looks long, but we're not asking for a lot of information. We simply need to have things that we can use, that we require for the full application, and to be able to undertake a credible evaluation of those proposals. So this goes beyond the sort of letter of intent requirement for what we need. But that application form is in the process of being finalized and translated into French, and it will be available fairly shortly. But essentially, we just need a little bit of information about each of these pieces of your project, your proposal, that will feed into the full application. And so this is an iterative process, and as I mentioned before, we're not in a position to make those final funding decisions. When we get through into October, we have a green light, then there'll be opportunities to update all of these. And as well, there will be other calls for proposals going forward where things be submitted again. But it's our first attempt to try to capture in this format, in the way that we need to be able to function and move forward as an NCE, as a network, the type of information. So we've tried to make it very straightforward, and this will be available soon. Next slide.
Great.
The forms will be available on the Mountain Network website. The instructions and application forms will be available in French and English, but we're requiring this time that all of the application documents be submitted in English only. We're not quite able to function fully bilingually, and our intent is that future proposals could be accepted for review in both English and French. And if you have any questions during the application process, please ask. We have a group in the different regions, and certainly here in Edmonton that can provide advice. We really do want you to ask questions and not sort of have to guess about what the process or the expectation is. Next slide, please. So timelines. The information guide, the application and budget template will be online at the end of next week. We would also ask that, and we'll remind people about this, but to provide us with a short project description fairly soon afterwards, once they've sort of outlined something. And the reason for this is we want to be able to make sure that the review, the adjudication committee that will look at these things has appropriate disciplinary representation. And because of the timelines we're on, the sooner we know about the types of things that are coming in, the more proactively we can try to line people up on a short timeline. So it's not essential, but we will remind people that this would be really, really useful, and certainly would be an advantage for you to let us know ahead of time. The proposals will be due on the 30th of April, midnight local time. We probably won't enforce it to the minute, but that's when we'd like to receive these, and then through the month of May we will, as quickly as possible, expedite that review process. And of course, once these forms are available online, please feel free to share those widely within your network. We will, of course, be distributing to our partners that have been involved in the development of the network so far and in the LOI, but we've decided to make this open. I think that's a good way to proceed. I think last slide. Okay, next steps is maybe, what do you think, Christy? Should we stop and talk about the call? Let's stop and talk about the call right now if anyone has any questions. And maybe go to Whitehorse first if there's anyone in the room there.
Want to have any comments? I want to be a lively group, you guys.
Okay, there's
for us, bring some teams together, and and I think from a network perspective, my sense, maybe this is something David and Norma you can clarify, but you're looking for proposals, I'm assuming, that are both sort of community relevant and have those partnerships, but also have potential for connection and relevance and impact nationally as well. How do you foresee, I guess these short project descriptions being submitted as soon as possible, that getting those in may help to build teams and make some connections that folks may not have seen before, so that would be an advantage of that, I would guess. Sorry, this is Ainsley talking from Yukon.
David, you want
to? Go ahead, Norma.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Ainsley. That's a really good point. And in some ways, this is reminiscent of what happened at the beginning of the International Polar Year, where we asked for expressions of interest. And although this is a little bit different, I think you're absolutely correct. This is a way we can capture that those diverse interests and perhaps more locally important and relevant project proposals, but then find ways to make those connections across Canada. And that's one of the goals, and certainly in challenge area number 4, is to really look at ways that mountain communities across Canada can learn from each other and benefit and help to influence policies at the national level that then trickle down to have benefits for enhancing quality of life that are really in the context of local aspirations, but positioning themselves in a global economy and a global space. So I think I don't know what we're going to receive. Norma has been working with some communities. We've all been sort of the groups that have been involved in the development so far, I think, have been thinking about what this would look like. People did press a pause button from the LOI until we knew about the full application moving ahead. I think that's pretty natural. But I think that there's a lot of good ideas, and we need to try to capture those in this process. So I don't have rather than trying to constrain it, we just want to be realistic about what this process is and what the outcome of it will be. But it will certainly help us to build a proposal and through that make some of those connections that you were hinting at. Norma?
Bronwyn has a comment as well.
Yeah, I have a comment. I was just thinking about, I completely understand why the quick turnaround is necessary. I know Norma's been talking with lots of communities. I think it will be challenging to prepare good preparatory potential mode 3 projects in a short time. And so we'll certainly do our work to try to make that happen. But I guess my comment is that I hope that the adjudication committee will recognize that those kinds of proposals take some time to develop. And so the mode 3 proposals that come forward may not look as, have as much depth yet as some of the mode 1 and maybe mode 2 proposals. And so, yeah, I hope that the adjudication committee recognizes the work that is required to build a good trust-based, collaborative, co-developed mode 3 project.
Thanks, Bronwyn. I think that's really important, and that guidance is something I hope it is reinforced in the composition of that committee and the work that it does. And our intent is that in the next call we would be able to make resources available to help with proposal development. We just don't have that opportunity right now. So I think we have to be very aware that we're not excluding certain, the potential for groups to be participating because of that. And we aren't actually handing money out. We're collecting ideas at this point. So I think as we go ahead, we'll remain as open to input as we can through this process, and then in other ways as well. On this.
It's Heather again in Edmonton. Just thinking about this same issue, but from the point of view of a much higher level, what is the actual application going to look like when we send it to Ottawa? I think it's worth considering a kind of a quota system, right? And so we want to make sure that we have allocations. We want to make sure that we have X number of mode 3, X number of mode 2. We decide that in advance. We're going to have a proportion of each. We decide that we're going to have a proportion that represent both NSERC and SSHRC kind of funding or collaboration between them. And I think it would be worthwhile in the project description, like when the preparatory call goes out, to say, send us your project description so that we can connect you with someone else who has a similar kind of project. So that then that call becomes an opportunity to help people network, so that we make sure that the applications actually combine both community-based research and NSERC kind of research, so that we can actually help those things develop that way. And I think it's important, again, at the higher level, when we're thinking about a kind of, what I'm using the term quota, is that we're going to use these projects to address some of the weaknesses that the team has laid out for us, so that we can double dip there, or hit 2 birds with 1 stone and say, sure, yes, here's how these research themes are going to be coherent. See, this mode 1, this mode 2, this mode 3 project are going to feed together through the HQPs or through the kinds of questions that we're asking. The researchers in the research-led stuff are actually paying attention to what the community is saying we need, because we need to know about what's happening with caribou. So I think we can put that into the preparatory call and make it very clear that we're not saying no to the project if someone comes in. We're going to cherry pick the ones that are going to make the NCE the most successful it can be.
That's exactly right. There's another filter on all of this, which is we don't have to be successful in this. We need to make sure we are strong, and but we don't want to do this top down. This needs to be a bottom up thing
for sure.
And we will have time between the end of April and when we need to submit this to undertake some of that in a sort of maybe Perlan. Yes.
Hello, bonjour, tout le monde. Tenze, this is Perlan Raikwan in Edmonton. I have 3 questions. I'd like to ask, first of all, in the spirit of Heather's statement, will small teams be encouraged along with larger teams? And I very much like your proposal to have quota allocations toward the ABC style of modes, and also to share them across SSHRC and NSERC and CIHR groups and types of research. The other thing I wanted to ask is, will you be welcoming projects at all stages, or do you want projects that are at the initiation stage, or could it be closer to publication stage? And last, if you are submitting a proposal, are you still eligible to serve as a reviewer en anglais puis en français?
Yeah, I think so. Teams, we haven't defined what a team is, and haven't excluded individual projects, but that's not, I think, typically what an NCE is trying to encourage. In terms of being eligible to be a reviewer, I mean, it's just conflicts of interest, in my view, just need to be declared, right? So we're not excluding the possibility of people being involved in that process going forward, but it's just important to know if there's potential for that. So we're, the mountain community in Canada is sufficiently small that we will be working with each other at different stages. But the whole idea of collaboratively building this whole thing is really important. And your second question was about?
Stage of project.
Stage of project.
Team.
Yeah, well, size of team, I said, is really something user-defined, depending on what the nature of the project is. And then stage of project, I think, is something that is, again, up to the applicant in terms of, what the fit is. There is a desirability, not an absolute requirement for co-funding or partnership funding. So there may be things that are simply, this would be the only source of resources that might be available, and that could be to get something going or to finish something. I don't have any specifics in mind. Or it could be a project that's continuing and is grounded in some sort of other program funding that would then have a new element that would be supported through the Canadian Mountain Network. So I think there's a variety of possibilities, and I think we need to see some of these and learn from that process about how to be accommodated. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that, Norma or Ainsley or anyone?
Like for the preparatory calls, we have to keep in mind that the project funding allocation is $150,000. And of course, these projects, once completed, will be public information. So if research was to take place here in the Yukon, for example, we can connect with several partners. However, we have to get the work done within the allocated budget that's allocated, right? So, and we also have the opportunity with these proposals to bring in other funding as well. So I thought I'd just say that to ensure that, to talk about the extent of partnership development within these projects, some of these projects.
Yeah, it certainly will be iterative, and the experience in other NCEs, I think, is that a project, as it develops or moves through the initial stages of implementation, attracts other partners, right? So this sort of awareness of people of where it's possible to collaborate or work together separate, from separate funding initiatives or through the NCE. That's the advantage of a network, is people start to get to know each other and the opportunities for collaboration improve over time. And we're just at this very, very early stage. So let me just finish the last slide, and then we can open it up for everyone. So next steps. The steering group will be involved in providing advice on planning the full application review process and adjudication process and how that will unfold. And we also, more widely, will be circulating a request for names of individuals to build the governance and research program leadership of the CMN, the committees related to data. There's a few that have formed during to data management and things like that, and HQP. Those formed during the LOI phase, but we have some other pieces that we're going to advance, and we certainly will want to have people step forward and contribute to that. So we'll get more information out about those things once there are terms of reference and roles and responsibilities finalized for those sorts of things. The HQP and knowledge mobilization, and the community partnerships. Maybe afterwards, Matthew Berry could say a few things, but that will be developing in parallel. And I just want to underline that we are working with some urgency to define, better define the details in letters of support from partners. Early on, some of those things for the LOI, again, not surprisingly, came later in the day, but the homework we did in developing the LOI is sort of, I think, identified where those possibilities are. Some of those are with provincial and territorial governments, some of them lie with other college and university partners, and with private sector partners, business partners, and with other communities. Remember, this isn't just cash, but in kind as well, that we need to identify. And that match for our request from NCE over the 5 years is $20 million. It doesn't have to, by the end of those 5 years. So that's, we think that's manageable based on what we learned during the LOI phase, but that's another piece of the puzzle where the less uncertainty there is going, as we move forward to July about the nature of that co-funding and partnership support will be useful. And then the last point, and we can turn this back to Christy at the end, but we haven't set a time for the next webinar to share things with you, but there certainly will be, I think, needs to do that in the coming weeks, and certainly not too far into the future. Norma, is there anything about next steps that you would like to contribute to this list?
Well, I think I guess there is an urgency to get the expert panels together, and also there's these preparatory proposals we're looking at. We're needing to get those in sooner than later. And to give, I guess, get an indication, a one-pager indication of what kinds of proposals will be coming in. At least if we had those, then we could certainly plan around those and start setting out for the main proposal. And also, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That, like, we do have till we have such a short timeline that we have a lot of work to do, and we need to get busy in many areas. Brian has a comment.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I guess I've got a question about the preparatory call, and it picks up on the point that you made earlier about the funding cap or the envelope available for proposals at this point. Ultimately, $150,000 over 3 years isn't very much, and I would scope an extremely different project. Per
year, Brian, per year.
Per year, oh, okay. Even then, I guess that definitely improves things a lot, but is that the scale of project that you expect to be looking for when it gets to go time and Mountain Network is a real thing?
Well, it certainly is scalable, given the breadth. So that calculation is based a little bit on the budget, which has a research allocation piece of somewhere around $2 to $2.5 million. And given the breadth of the research program that's necessary for an NCE, there's a certain number of projects that need to be included and supported through the network. So when you do the division of what's available versus the number of participants and the number of research projects that would be supported through the network, you end up pretty close to that number. We could go to a couple 100,000 a year, but then that significantly reduces the number of projects and the number of partners and the number of participants in the network. So we haven't had that discussion about what we would do going forward, but in that in the LOI with the 5-year horizon, and working with very large rounding errors on things, given all of the things the network is expected to do as an NCE, and there would be other, so within the network there is money for the knowledge translation that could be separate. will be separate. There's money for supporting training that could be allocated separately. That doesn't necessarily all need to be wrapped into the project budgets. There may be targeted calls if we can find other sources of funding, and this is something we're working on with the Mountain Municipalities Consortium. So there may be other ways that money could be, typically with these networks, then once a project is successful, then there's other funding internally within the network that can support specific activities that projects would undertake. But the short answer is I think that it doesn't make sense that it's less than that. I think that makes it not very attractive, but a lot of work for not very much. But to have a larger possibility for funding individual projects, that then ends up reducing the number of things, the number of activities that can be supported through the network. So I guess we'll see. That's part of the learning of this preparatory call is to see what that balance looks like, and how we do that allocation and distribution given the priorities that we've identified as a collective. Christy, a question online.
Yes. Can a PI submit only a single proposal? Can they be listed as a co-PI on more than one application?
We haven't put a restriction on that. I don't see a problem with that. But the same requirements would, of course, be required for the application in terms of partners.
I have a couple more questions. There's a question about, is there a list of all the support partners post-secondary industry? I'm not entirely sure what they mean by that. We certainly
There's commas in there.
Yeah.
Post-secondary or industry.
It just says, is there a list of all the support partners?
Right. So I would direct people to the Mountain Network website where you can find the letter of intent, and we have posted all of the letters of support that we received. There's 40 of them at least from partners from different sectors, and that's not the exhaustive list. Some groups are supportive but didn't provide a letter, but that's an awfully good place to start to look. And then if you have a more specific inquiry about a particular region or thing, just let us know, and we can try to answer that.
One final one online. Will there be any requirements for depositing research data into a data repository, openly or not?
Yes, so we have a data, there was a data committee during the LOI stage. There's sort of a data policy, but it hasn't been sort of formally aligned with or approved by the CMN. That would be something that happens, but it exists. Our expectation is that the Tri-Council standards, the standards around OCAP, and best practices, working with a number of possible data center partners to make resources available that would allow to support the Canadian Mountain Network, and a data management plan for projects that are funded and successful would be required. But we're not requiring that at this stage. They're in the preparatory call, perhaps just a comment about some awareness or issues that would be specific to a project in terms of data preservation, data management, data sharing, data synthesis would be appropriate. But we're not. There's lots of resources within the network that have lots of experience with that, and we're just not requiring it specifically at this point in time. But it is something that we hope to be able to support through the NCE funding envelope as well, where there's a particular ability for us to help to develop relevant mountain specific depositories or other resources. Is anything else?
Ainsley here, just a question. I'm wondering if, just given the extra challenges and I guess disparities out there in the system on folks getting ready for the Mode 3 types of calls, I'm wondering if there'd be any advantage to setting up a webinar for folks who are interested in doing those kinds of projects to meet with PIs and the team here and just talk about what those challenges are. So we're aware of them as a network from the get-go, and what we can do sort of network-wide to facilitate those projects coming in and being addressed within our full proposal, given the timeline of just the reality of capacity in Indigenous communities.
Great idea. Let's be very proactive on that. Super. Norma?
That's a great idea. I think that's definitely needed for sure. We can set that up as soon as possible.
Yeah, and we need to do it regionally as well. So we'll pay attention to that. Thanks, Ainsley. Perlin.
Just a quick thought related to broad participation and scale. Perhaps give some further thinking to how $150,000 can represent a large budget for some kinds of projects. And in the interests of strengthening the ultimate longer-term goal, perhaps some broader windows there or opportunities for those kinds of projects, perhaps with smaller teams or a different nature of research that has a lower price tag.
You don't need to request 150. So that's just the cap, right? Yeah.
And I like that spirit because it's about sharing.
Yeah. No one will be disadvantaged if they receive an application for $60,000. I mean, that's not that. It's we simply needed to put an upper limit, so we didn't receive things for $1.2 million that realistically aren't the types of things that an NCE can support.
But it may help to field a larger size of applications at that proposal stage, just to get a peppering of what's out there. So I think that could add strength.
Sorry, the smaller numbers. Yeah, that's included in the portfolio.
Potentially, they might group in different ways as constellations.
Yeah, sure. Anything else?
So what is the plan for reviewing the little statements of this little abstract? This is the project we want to do. So this initial expression of what that project might look like.
Yeah, so that'd be through, with Norma and myself, the theme co-leads, and then part of that process is to then build those larger support teams for the network as a whole. And this is an assimilation. In a 40-page application, we have about half that text already, right? And I don't want to be sort of presumptive about the things that we're going to include in there, but that's why I think the earlier we can receive that information, it helps us with a whole bunch of things. Writing the proposal, looking at that synthetic approach to the outcomes that are going to be so important when we submit this, and of course the adjudication process itself to make sure that we have the right people involved. But, yeah.
I think it's a really important part of the process is to make sure that applicants who are interested know that the committee will be open to helping them to succeed, right? And helping them succeed by networking them with maybe other places that they don't know are doing similar kinds of things.
Yeah, no. If they succeed, then we succeed. And
exactly.
At this point, this isn't. It's not a constellation of separate. It's not separate stuff. The constellation.
It's a family. It's not a competition.
Yeah, and we've tried to be open about that. Clearly, we're getting to a point where people are starting to compete for funding, right? Which changes the dynamic. I don't know why, but I think as long as we sort of see that this isn't just a one-off, that a network that could have a lifespan of a decade and a half can do all sorts of things, and we're going to have trainees, HQP, youth coming in at the beginning of this, and you know what? They're going to be the leaders of it at the end. Yeah, exactly. I mean, my goal is to be pretty irrelevant, as quickly as possible.
This is the best goal ever, right?
We're going to bring people up through the system, right?
To become redundant.
Yeah, and that's why there's so much emphasis in NCEs on training and outcomes of learning and exposing students and youth to different types of research activities, different modes, different ways of knowing, and that's built in. I mean, it needs to be developed further, but if you look at our HQP piece, really tried to do that, and Bronwyn and others in the room in Whitehorse have been really influential in helping to shape that. So we have flexibility in this program in a way that I don't think has been necessarily true in previous rounds. Tri-Council indicated more of an openness to flowing funds to non-traditional partners, these types of programs, and we want to take advantage of that. We're going to be testing some ground in terms of what's possible, and I think we have a network that can do that. Yeah. Anything else online? Anything?
I have a question.
Yeah,
Mike Schmidt.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. This is a pan-Canadian effort, and in looking at the preparatory calls for proposals and going down the road from there, it would seem to me that we need to ensure that we demonstrate in our submission that this is in fact a pan-Canadian effort. And my sense to date is that we're quite strong in the West, but as we go across the country, there are perhaps some challenges. And I'm just wondering what has been done, what we need to do to, I guess, broaden the response to a preparatory call to ensure that we demonstrate a truly pan-Canadian sort of coast-to-coast-to-coast network.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's one that's been part of the discussion. We have Laurent Baudot at Laval is one of the theme co-leads, and especially on the tourism and regional economic development side in Quebec. There's obviously academics across the country at different institutions from coast to coast that are involved. Now, in terms of how we engage with Nunavut, remember ArcticNet is also going forward as a full proposal in this competition. And they're also expanding their geographic footprint to include Yukon, Northwest Territories, Kivalliq, and so we need to find a way of articulating what that looks like in terms of their priorities and the things that we can do. So I don't have an answer. That we need a little bit more discussion with ArcticNet about that. We want to be able to provide guidance to people because they are also going to be having a concurrent preparatory call for proposals for their full application process. So where's the articulation between ArcticNet and the Canadian Mountain Network? So it's not a good answer to your question. I don't think I'd want to exclude someone working in Baffin Island or Ellesmere or Torngat, but we are working now with colleagues at the Labrador Institute and at Memorial University to bring them in. But some of the feedback we've had from groups and communities that have strong partnerships with ArcticNet is that we don't want to be confusing things or competing with that. I would suggest that it might also be rational in the first 5 years as we get going to to be aware that Canada has mountains coast to coast to coast, but to focus our energies in places where we can perhaps start up more quickly, where development efforts have been focused over the last couple of years. So let's keep talking about this, Mike. I don't want to lose track of the national scope of the Mountain Network, but at this point, let's see what the outcome of the full competition is. Maybe after October we decide we do need to make sure that in the next couple of years we're fully embracing all of that. Brilliant.
When I saw the other NCEs stepping forward from the LOI stage, one of the themes that struck me might have some overlap with ours is the transient youth theme. And I wonder if you might pursue some of the potential linkages there related to social programs, social policy, services delivery, especially given that youth are a focus in any of our communities, and that transient youth and workforce is a major demographic cohort, particularly for tourism centers in mountain communities. And this is one place where I would really encourage reaching out to NGOs such as the YWCA, YMCA, also the United Nurses of Alberta, Canadian Social Work Association, all kinds of ways to link in with that, as well as Indigenous communities and governance structures. And I think that one could really be a nice tie-in, and it would raise the profile of social policy and services in our CMN at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. And certainly the space exists within Challenge 4 in particular to receive applications that develop those partnerships. So, yeah, I agree. Okay.
We have another question or comment here at this table.
Hi, this is Lawrence with AICBR, and just to sort of answer Michael's earlier question is that now that we have something actually more tangible, it makes things a little more easy to reach out, especially nationally, especially the webinar that Ainsley was talking about. That would be a great opportunity to start bringing more folks into the fold, discussing the details, getting their questions, getting their input, and also seeking out more people to be involved in terms of the other areas that the Canadian Mountain Network needs as well. So I also think we have to be able to, in terms of some of the politics that are going on right now, and particularly around the development of Arctic minutes. So.
Yeah, as I said, we need to be explicit about that. There is a section in the full application that requires that we have a clear understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, and likewise from their end. So there will be some discussion. Need to be some discussion with them and with other NCs. There's at least maybe one or two others where there's an interest in looking at common areas. But yeah, thanks, Lawrence. I mean, this is something that that again I hope will evolve over the coming weeks, and certainly if we are established, then there'll be lots of opportunities beyond. But I think we don't need to continue. If there's people online or that still have questions, we can go there, or we're in Whitehorse. But this. Oh, we have a closing slide, right? Gabby? There you go. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this, and really look forward to being with you during the development of the preparatory calls and in the development of the full application between now and July. So thank you. Norma and everyone in Whitehorse, thanks, and we can stay here in the room if you want to have a conversation that continues for a little bit.
What do you guys think?
I still have another question.
Yeah, we still have some questions here at the group, so we could do that.
I'm happy to just be part of that remotely if I mean others may need to run, but But certainly in terms of continuing the discussion, let's do it.
So the webinar is over officially? Everything's